Ivy Cottage by E.J. Taylor. For as long as Violet can remember, she has lived with Miss Biscuit in the big white house at the top of Beacon Hill. Miss Biscuit is the nanny there. Violet Pickles is a doll. A rag doll, except she is not an ordinary rag doll. She can write and talk and has very definite ideas about how most things should be done. Her eyes are blue and she wears glasses. She has long brown hair, which is beautiful, and freckles, which she doesn't like. Over the years, Violet and Miss Biscuit have looked after many children. Miss Biscuit would take them for long walks, prepare their lunch and tuck them in bed at night. Violet would read them stories and give them very good advice. They were not always happy to hear what she had to suggest, so Violet would say, "I'm only telling you this for your own good." And she was usually right. It was a way of life that Violet loved and she didn't think it would ever change. But one day, without warning, Miss Biscuit decided to retire. They were having tea on the porch when Miss Biscuit told Violet that they were moving to the country. Violet nearly fell off her chair. At first she laughed and said, "Oh, don't be silly. We have always lived in the city. What on earth would we do in the country?" Miss Biscuit put down her teacup and replied, "I have planned everything. We will live in the cottage that my Uncle Henry left to me. We can buy a goat, and plant a vegetable garden, and a strawberry patch, and some flowers. The country is full of wonderful things." Violet couldn't believe her ears. Miss Biscuit got up, cleared the teacups and took the tray into the kitchen. Violet just sat in her chair for hours and stared at a fern. Every day while Miss Biscuit packed, Violet tried to persuade her to stay. Every night, failing that, she cried herself to sleep. She soon realized that Miss Biscuit was determined to go and crying only gave her the hiccups. They let the big white house in a taxi and drove to the train station. Miss Biscuit had 2 suitcases, a hat box and her bicycle. Violet took a small suitcase, her teddy bear and a picnic hamper, which contained her favorite books, a paint set, a feather pillow, her blue blanket and silk ribbon. On the train, Miss Biscuit explained their route, adding that she had written to Mr. Bickerstaff, an old friend of her Uncle Henry. Mr. Bickerstaff owned the general store and would meet them and drive them to the cottage. Violet sat by the window and tried not to cry. Violet fell asleep. When she woke up, the train had arrived at their station. She looked a little puzzled as they stepped onto the platform. "There's no one here," she said, and she was right. They waited patiently for over an hour. Finally, Miss Biscuit stood up. "I think we had better get to the cottage on our own." "But we don't know the way," said Violet. Miss Biscuit smiled. "We'll find it," and she began stacking their luggage on the back of the bicycle. Violet looked worried. "It seems like an awful lot to keep balanced," she said. "We'll manage," Miss Biscuit replied. "Finding the cottage is our main concern. Let's concentrate on that and let the little things take care of themselves." She sat Violet in the basket on the handlebars and off they went. Miss Biscuit was enjoying the ride. Violet was just beginning to relax when they crossed the bridge and came to a very steep hill. Down they went, faster and faster. Violet's hair was blowing in the wind and Miss Biscuit nearly lost her hat when suddenly, there was a loud pop. "Oh, dear," said Miss Biscuit. "I think the tire's gone flat." The bicycle began to swerve and before they knew it, they were across the road and into the ditch and Miss Biscuit and Violet went flying into the air. "Hold on to my hand," cried Miss Biscuit. Fortunately, she had her umbrella, which she opened quickly. She and Violet floated down to a field and landed with a thump. Miss Biscuit sat up and straightened her hat. "My goodness," she chuckled. "Are you all right, Violet?" "Yes, I think I am." "Good. Then let's collect our things and be off. We've passed the bridge so the woods can't be far." "Oh no," cried Violet. "What's the matter?" asked Miss Biscuit. "Look, the bicycle. The wheels come off." Miss Biscuit turned to look. "Oh dear. Well, never mind that. We'll just have to walk." "Walk?" cried Violet in disbelief. Miss Biscuit stood up. "Now, Violet, try to cheer up and remember these little trials are sent to test us. They reached the woods at sunset and tried to hurry, though while they still had some light. The sky grew darker until all they could see were shadows in the trees. "It's creepy in here," said Violet, and suddenly she screamed. "What's that over there?" "It's only an owl," Miss Biscuit reassured her. They continued quietly, listening to the sounds in the dark. Miss Biscuit stopped. "I can hear the river. See that stone fence? We've reached the other side of the woods. The cottage is up there on that hill." They opened the gate and hurried up a narrow path. "Oh, thank goodness, we are here at last," cried Violet. Then she paused. "Where is the cottage?" "I can't see anything but trees." Miss Biscuit shook her head. "I don't understand. It's got to be here. But it's no use searching in the dark." "Well, I'll sleep under my umbrella and have another look in the morning." Violet was horrified. "Sleep on the ground?" "Yes," replied Miss Biscuit. "We brought you blue blanket. It won't be so bad." "Won't be so bad," cried Violet. "I can't think of anything worse than sleeping on the ground." And at that moment, it began to rain. The next morning the sun was shining and birds were singing. However, it was the loud noises in the distance that woke him up. "Bang! Bang! Bang! We're being attacked!" cried Violet, pulling the blanket over her head. Miss Biscuit walked to the road to have a look. Pop! Bang! Hisss. The sounds were getting louder. Slowly a rickety old car appeared. Thas another loud bang. And it stopped at the gate. "Good morning, you must be Miss Biscuit." "Yes, I am. You must be Mr. Bickerstag." "That's right." He smiled. "Sorry I missed your train. This old contraption broke down of me yesterday on my way to the station. I just got it running again." "Oh, don't worry," replied Miss Biscuit. "We found our way here. But no, we can't find the cottage." Mr. Bickerstaff laughed. "I'll show you where it is." "Violet, this is Mr. Bickerstaff," said Miss Biscuit. "He is going to help us find the cottage." "Hello," said Violet. "It's kind of you to help, but I'm afraid the cottage has disappeared. Without a home we'll be forced to go back to the city." Mr. Bickerstag smiled. "Look over there," he said, "and tell me what you see." "I see some trees and a lot of ivy," replied Violet. "Walk very close to the ivy and look again." "Well, I see more ivy and 3 brown ants." Violet waited for the ants to move and carefully peeked under an ivy leaf. "Oh dear," she sighed. "What is it?" asked Miss Biscuit. "Bricks," said Violet. Not at all pleased. "That's it, you found the cottage. It's under all that ivy," cried Miss Biscuit, and she began to laugh. "Tea was right in front of us all the time." "It's going to need a lot of work," said Violet. Miss Biscuit stood back to have a better look. "What do you think, Mr. Bickerstaff?" "Well, first you'll need to cut away all the ivy." "Maybe not," said Miss Biscuit. "I like the ivy. Why don't we clip it around the doors and windows and leave the rest as it is?" "Good idea," he replied. "Let's get started." In a short time they had pulled away enough of the ivy to open the front door. It was dark inside, but Violet found a candle. Miss Biscuit discovered a large pair of scissors in the kitchen. They opened the windows and snipped away the heavy growth of leaves covering them. Soon inside the cottage was filled with sunlight. "Oh, it's beautiful," said Miss Biscuit. "It's just as I remembered it." They explored the cottage from top to bottom. There were dust and cobwebs, but everything seemed to be in working order. Mr. Bickerstag cleaned the chimney and they built a fire. Soon every room was warm and cozy. In a few days it began to feel like home, although Violet insisted that her bed was uncomfortable. They were ready to start the garden when it began to rain. Violet was relieved. She didn't like getting her hands dirty, and she wanted to catch up on some reading. It rained for days and days. "I'm very bored," Violet said. "There is nothing for me to do." Miss Biscuit picked up her sewing basket, a jar of old buttons, a flour sack and a ball of red yarn. "Will you excuse me for a while?" she said, and walked into the kitchen and closed the door. Violet was puzzled. Hours passed. Violet sat by the window watching the rain. At 5 o'clock Miss Biscuit came out of the kitchen. "Close your eyes and count to 10. Violet counted and opened her eyes. Sitting in the chair opposite her was another rag doll. Shush, is funny looking, said Violet. What's her name? She doesn't have one yet. I'm very good with names. Violet thought for a moment. She has a button nose and hair the color of rubies. And rubies are very rare, added Miss Biscuit. How about we call her Ruby Buttons? Well, I guess she is kind of rare, said Violet. All right, we'll call her Ruby Buttons. Ruby sat motionless in the chair. Do you think she can speak? Asked Violet. Why don't you ask her? Violet leaned forward and said, terrible weather we're having here. Huh, there was no reply. Violet asked if a cat got her tongue. Don't be rude, exclaimed Miss Biscuit. Perhaps she's cold. I'll put some more wood on the fire. The log was heavy and it dropped with a thud. Cinders and ashes flew into the grate. Suddenly there was a loud sneeze. Excuse me. Ruby looked at Violet and Miss Biscuit. Hello, she said and climbed down from her chair. Oh, what a beautiful room. I'm glad you like it, said Miss Biscuit. Are you hungry? Oh yes, I am. Wonderful. Then follow me. Ruby bounced after Miss Biscuit. Violet followed doubtfully. The kitchen was warm and full of good smells. There were flowers and candles on the table, with 3 place settings of Miss Biscuit's best silver and china on a white tablecloth. Miss Biscuit poured some apple cider and raised her glass. I'd like to make a toast. Welcome to Ivy Cottage, she said. Here's to Biscuit, Buttons and Pickles. And they all sat down to dinner. The end.